This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Welcome to Auteur Detour. Talking Coen Brothers. This week is the Hudsucker Proxy. All right, so the Hudsucker Proxy was released in 1994 and is the fifth feature film from Joel and Ethan Coen. Lots of Fs. Fifth feature film. The story begins as Waring Hudsucker, the president and namesake of Hudsucker Industries, abruptly jumps to his death in the middle of a board meeting. The shifty board of directors, led by Paul Newman's Sidney Musburger, hatches a scheme to appoint an incompetent proxy as the new president in order to depress the stock price so that the board can gain controlling interest in the company. Otherwise, the shares would have been made available to the public. Now, the board appoints Norval Barnes, here played by Tim Robbins, as the bright-eyed, naive replacement after he's sent from his position in the mailroom to deliver a blue letter to Sidney. Now, the plan backfires when Norval, as president, invents the hula hoop, making the company more valuable than ever before. All the while, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Amy Archer, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, has gained exclusive access to Norval after he unwittingly hires her as his secretary, who uses her position to initially smear him in the press, but develops an endearing fondness for him as the film goes on. Success, however, goes to Norval's head, and he becomes a heartless tyrant, laying off numerous employees from the types of lower-level positions he himself once occupied. Now, Norval hears from Sidney that the board intends to fire him at the rapidly approaching end of the year, and after a series of unfortunate events, Norval decides to end it all by jumping from the top of the Hudsucker building on New Year's Eve. However, Moses, the film's magical Negro, saves Norval by jumping at the hands of the clock and thereby stopping time as he's falling. And so the ghost/angel of Waring Hudsucker appears and reminds him of the blue letter he failed to deliver to Sidney at the beginning of the movie, which actually bequeaths the entirety of Hudsucker's stock to the new president, in this case being Norval. In the end, Sidney Musburger is committed to an institution after trying to jump off the very building himself, and Norval continues on as Hudsucker's president, revealing plans for his next invention, the Frisbee. You know, for the kids. What'd you guys think?
Travis, you go first.
All right. I think this is like the Coen brothers' like biggest budget movie so far, right? And like visually it is like incredible. It is an incredible achievement. It is masterful at a level, like a new level for them. And it's not just like the perfect dialogue with like the perfect visuals with the perfect music over it. It's like every split second is kind of like orchestrated to symphonic perfection by them as directors. I think this movie, especially like the editing of it, the montages is like the template for like so many other directors that kind of came after them. I was thinking a lot of like Edgar Wright watching this movie. I was thinking about like Wes Anderson watching this movie. In fact, I think that like I feel like Wes Anderson watched this like right before he made Royal Tenenbaums. Totally. Actually, I actually thought Wes Anderson too. There were like some like lines that I think were kind of echoed in that movie. Actually, like that was the level of kind of detail. But so I mean, I love the kind of like screwball comedies that this movie kind of like borrows so heavily from, even though I think it's weird that the movie's style is clearly like drawn from like the 30s and the 40s, whereas like it takes place like in the late 50s. And
it's also interesting that they like, they speak like they're in the 30s, but they're dressed like they're in the 40s, and like it's in the 50s, and like the architect, like it's totally it's an melding. It's like
an interesting mishmash.
Yeah,
I feel like I don't think I feel like these three movies are like Miller's Crossing, Barton Fink, and this one are all kind of like pastiches of other films, but
pastiche was the word
they won't like they're not satisfied just doing like one thing. You know what I mean? They can't just say like, oh, we'll make a 30s movie, we'll make a 40s movie. They have to like combine different genres or combine different kind of elements of things. Sometimes to wonderful effect, sometimes to like less wonderful effect. But I don't feel like it was like as fun as and exciting as something like Raising Arizona that really felt like a mishmash of different things, and that became something totally new and interesting on its own. And I also think, as perfect as it is, it's a very dark movie. It's a very cold movie, and it definitely, like the other two in this kind of 3-movie series, are like the Up Their Own Ass trilogy. It leaves me really like exhausted by the end. It gets a little tiresome, and I think the story, in the symphony, the story notes, the character notes become very faint as it goes on, as like the atmosphere kind of takes over. So that's my overall kind of thought. I mean, it's a wonder to behold. It is easy to like, and for me, a little difficult to love.
I will preface by saying, like, I did laugh a lot during it. Like, there were like undoubtedly moments where, they're funny guys. They write funny stuff sometimes. And I laughed. And also was kind of blown away by some of the dream ballets that happened through it, like the Sam Raimi directed the second unit parts, and he did the scene where they're creating the hula hoop, that like kinetic manic thing with all the Banker's fucking pneumatic tubes, all that whole thing. That was all Sam Raimi, and it feels Sam Raimi. But like all of those segments, there's tons of them in the movie, and I think that they're incredibly beautiful. Like none more so to me than like the hula hoop segment where the kid finds the hula hoop, and then that's incredible. Like I loved all of that, but I did not like this movie. Like I hadn't seen it, and I couldn't even remember like when I had seen it, but I know that I had. And I was expecting it, in my memory anyway, to be like, Barton Fink was the difficult one for me in this little, it's not a trilogy, but in this little segment of their career. And this one to me, like, my big takeaway was like, they didn't learn their own lesson from making Barton Fink, which is to not get crushed under your own hubris. Like, it felt like they like, I hate, we've talked about hating that argument of like all style and no substance.
Yeah.
But watching this movie, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I know why people said that about this movie.
We started off being like, I just want to say first off the bat, I reject that argument. The Coen brothers have won me back over to the side of that argument against them.
Exactly. Because it is, what I realized is that like when, that was the huge critique of this movie and had been for some of their other movies. And I had totally disagreed with it, like we're saying, but like watching this one, I'm like, I don't think it's that they only cared about style. It just feels like they had put so much effort into getting it right that they lost control of it. Like they didn't know what they were trying to do or something, like in terms of tone or in terms of, I don't know, like.
Something else about Raising Arizona, it's short. It is an incredibly short film. Yeah. It gets in, it hits all those notes. Again, the story is that basic Coen Brothers thing where somebody does something bad, even though it's not that bad, but it like unleashes like an evil into the world that they have to like defeat or be a victim to. This is like, that is like something that the Coen Brothers like need to get out of their system. They wanted to, that's, like they created like 2 perfect movies off the bat from there. Then with all their talent, I mean, this is like kind of how I see it, they're like, now what? And then they kind of create these 3 movies that are just like, hey, we like this kind of thing. Let's do something like this.
Right.
And, I see them all as like insane, like, exercises like in style. Like Miller's Crossing is all dialogue. Like it's like 99% dialogue. It's got more words and great lines than like any other movie I can think of. Barton Fink is like all atmosphere. Like it's all kind of like this kind of grading kind of mood. And then this movie is all montage. Like it's all just kind of like a visual, like a city symphony, right? And I feel like all 3 of the movies, like, are incredible exercises like in those kind of areas of filmmaking, but they are telling stories that like they don't seem to have the same connection to. They are so I feel like that's kind of what was going on. And I feel like with Fargo, they went back to like, which is like the next movie, they went back to the, like just their original kind of thing of like what kind of story we want to tell. It was shorter. It was it was like a balance of all these different things that they're like clearly like masterful at, and that's sort of something that
I felt watching this one like it was just like a culmination of all of their what they had done so far. Like, it's so heavy on their motifs and their tropes and their like, their, even to the point of like throwing in, they love to build up their repertoire, but then they like have like John Polito just like pop his head up for 1 second and then disappears. Like they just like, John Goodman as like the newsreel announcer. It's like they just have these like, they're just like, it is up their own ass. That's what it is. Yeah. Like you called it last week. I didn't feel it as, I didn't see it as much until this week where I was like, yeah, that's exactly what they are. They're just like, they've got this like circle thing that they're so fascinated with. And they're like, okay, we're fucking doing this. We're making a movie about circles.
Tonight. My wife, I watched this movie with my wife, and she got so pissed when the Hey Buddy guy pitched the straw with the drawing of a circle. She's like, no one would draw a straw like that. She would not accept that. But really yeah, like it's funny because they talk a lot about, and I did zero research this week. I didn't read anything. I didn't look at anything. But I stumbled early, like in another week, onto something that said that they really wanted to, they really wanted this movie to be like another breakthrough for them, like a popular success. It's rated PG, and there was like so much work done in the production design and everything like that, and getting everything right.
Paul Newman.
But then it's got Paul Newman. It's got all these like big stars, but. It's called The Hudsucker Proxy. Just that title alone is so off-putting and like meaningless and just kind of annoying. And then it opens with like a suicide. Like it's it's just such a like. And then the whole rest of the movie is like it's fun for a minute, and then it just gets very cold and very bleak very quickly. And even though.
Also, Chris, you haven't told us what you thought about it, though. Did you like the movie?
Yeah.
I know it's your first
right.
Coen Brothers movie.
Absolutely. So, this may be clouding my judgment a little bit because, like I mentioned, this actually was the very first Coen Brothers film I ever saw, and it was on cable when I was a kid. And it was, years after it came out. I hadn't seen it in the theater. And I remember it being this is fun and quirky because I remember the dialogue and the interactions and just the energy of the characters was really infectious at the time. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I really like this, despite it not being the most easily followable film for a kid per se. What's this stock suppression and this? Why do they want him to fail? I didn't quite get all of this other stuff, but I watch it again. I still really like it. I try to approach each of these from, a neutral standpoint and not let my prior judgments impact my, current experience of the movie. And I still really like this film. What you touched on, though, Travis, is actually really interesting because I started this movie, and even though it's got this bleak feel, it looks great. I started with this big smile on my face, ironically, as wearing Hudsuckers falling from the building, because it just looks so
that was
awesome.
The other big segment that was directed by Sam Raimi.
I didn't even know that. That's really, really interesting. And clearly, because he's got like talk about the regulars. You've got Bruce Campbell in it, who's like in every single Sam Raimi movie there is, right? Yeah. I actually really like this movie, and it's not my favorite, obviously, and I don't think this is actually a good, quote, good movie, but it's a movie that I kind of enjoyed. But at the same time, touching on Travis's point, it's one that kind of starts to wear on you a little bit toward the end. Like I said, I had this big smile on my face at the beginning. It's great. It's going smoothly. And then it's like, it's a little too long. Even though it's only, an hour and 45, an hour and 50 minutes, it feels like a full over 2 hour movie for whatever reason. I think part of it is the maintaining of the energy, and the like certain characters are really, really intense. Like Jennifer Jason Leigh's character is just, her dialogue is very, very snappy. But a lot of people are playing that part, right? Like buddy, hey, buddy, always, the entire movie, this guy's buddy, right? So again, to answer your question, I really like the movie. It's not my favorite, but I still enjoyed it, and it's good to see that something I actually liked back then still holds up. And I really like how this movie is both similar to a lot of the films in their canon and very different in a number of other ways. And maybe we touch on some of that later. But I did enjoy this one. I'm glad I got to see it again.
It was great for me to be thrown back in, for whatever reason, in the early 90s. They loved Art Deco. Like Art Deco had like a weird resurgence in the early 90s, and I was thinking of all the movies that this was reminding me of. more than any, Dick Tracy. And I'd love to talk a little bit about what Dick Tracy does well that this movie does not do well. But it also had like a Gremlins 2 vibe with like the way the business kind of happened. Yeah, like
Metropolis, maybe Fritz Lang.
Yeah. And for sure, I mean, Brazil was like, I think
exactly
a huge influence.
It's funny you said that, because I'm like watching this going, this feels like a Terry Gilliam movie. Did he like influence, especially with the production and like the cold sort of like institutional feeling and the criticism of like this inhumanity of a system, while there's like this central sort of human character in the middle of it all?
Yes, absolutely. And like, but that movie again, I think it was like tying like future, dystopia that like it's like projecting into like the future, but being like, we've already gone through this too, and making like a point about that. This just felt like purely just like a stylistic flourish, and just like, let's just try it. You know what I mean? Let's just go for it. And,
totally.
Well, yeah, I mean, they built like a, 1/40th scale of New York City that had to have its own sound stage. Like, it's like,
nice.
It's it's like not in theme, but just in like action. That made me think of whatever it's called, Synecdoche, New York.
Yeah, totally.
Because I'm like, this was
Kaufman.
like their version of that, but not in the movie, but like the behind the scenes was their version of that. They're like trying to create this world.
I was reminded too of when you first see Sidney Musburger's office when he's about to deliver the blue letter in the beginning of Citizen Kane, when you see him, because the windows are just humongous. Yeah. It's like comically, gigantically vacuous, right?
That's such a 90s aesthetic though, that like that kind of modern, like throwback deco, but like a little too, like ultra modern. Like I love that office so much, where you can see part of the clock. I mean, this movie, like a couple times, just the production design made me want to stand up and applaud. And like, I think, in addition to the movies we've mentioned, also the Tim Burton Batman movies, and not just the visuals, not just the kind of like verticality of it, but also, and the darkness of it, and the snow,
Can I tell you,
but also the score is incredible. Like the symbols in the score is incredibly Danny Elfman-esque, and it's just
I watched this movie, and then I literally the next day was like, my daughter's 10, and I'm like, I'm going to show her the new Batman. Like, it made me think of it.
Yeah,
I mean, not the new Batman. I'm going to show her Batman, because like, I'm like, that just made me think of it too.
Especially the clock tower area, especially that with the steam and the gears.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Batman holds up. That movie's great. That movie's great.
It's good. It's good.
I went the last. Batman Returns is better. I agree. But I'll tell you this: I went the last like post, Dark Knight era, being like, oh, like Batman sucks. Like it doesn't, like whatever. But watching it again, I was like appreciative of it in a new way. Like totally. I don't know. I ate it up. I was liking it. And that's maybe great. It is that I'm like liking that weird 90s fucking gothic aesthetic. I don't know.
Like, I mean, this had so many great effects that were like, right on the cusp of the digital era, like effects that were done so well and looked so kind of like cohesive to the film. And so like matte paintings that were just like gorgeous to look at. Yeah. And like every time they showed the city with like the bottoms of the buildings kind of fading away, and like as they went into the distance, I just was like crying. I was so happy, even though I mean, I think the problem for me with this movie is like the characters make these kind of like abrupt turns that the story doesn't really, it justifies on the most like flimsy kind of premise, and like Tim Robbins like becoming evil. And like, and then Jennifer Jason Leigh, who's probably my favorite character in the movie. You get like one scene where she comes in like a firecracker, and she's like, like a Howard Hawks. I wrote the word femme vivant character, like from that era. Like, and you're like, oh yeah, I love this kind of character. It's like Katharine Hepburn's voice, but she's like Rosalind Russell from His Girl Friday, like this newspaper.
And then she's doing like Jean Arthur in like the Frank Capra movies too.
Yes, I was gonna say, but then like it becomes like a Frank Capra thing, because she's immediately like, she never gets a moment of like, I'm making a fool out of this guy, this is gonna be great, like, and then like slowly feeling bad for him and being won over. It's just like she immediately regrets it, and then she just kind of like mopes around for the rest of the movie, and it very much becomes a Frank Capra movie up to and including the suicide scene. But so it's
straight
like
out of
So it's it's straight out of It's a Wonderful
Meet
Life.
John Doe.
And Meet John Doe,
And
exactly.
Meet John
Meet John
Doe.
Doe, yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. And I was like, because Barbara Stanwyck in that movie starts like a super strong reporter and then becomes like a, kind of regretful
That's why
wannabe wife, which is like...
Jennifer Jason Leigh was like by far the standout in this movie to me, because to me she was the only one who like really nailed the tone of those movies, that like 3 decades of movies that they're trying to do. And she fucking nailed it. Like she's she's going for it. Like she's literally doing Katharine Hepburn's voice. Like it's a caricature, but like it works. Whereas I've got the fix for this movie. I already am just gonna do, like I suggested, the plus it up segment, like my fix for this movie, which I think would make it 1,000 times better, is fucking slide Tim Robbins the fuck out the movie and slide on in Steve Buscemi into that role, and it's 100 times better of a movie. I think that
That's interesting.
Like,
he's so good as the beatnik bartender.
Yeah, he's fine as the beatnik bartender, but I imagine him, especially like since the only collaborations he, where we know him from at this point, up to this point, is Mink in Miller's Crossing and then Chet in Barton Fink, and he's got that fucking vibe already.
Yes,
he can shed that. Like he wanted to shed it. You feel like, not like they imagine that they offered it to him because this is a big budget movie, but like, he sheds it in Fargo, like to an insane degree, and he becomes like this, trashy fucking Uncle Rico, like a motherfucker, Yeah. But in this, I feel like Tim, like what he would have is like the small town Muncie, Indiana vibe guy, but also like have like the chops to pull off the fucking 30s dialogue and that whole, I don't know. I also don't think Tim Robbins.
I think well, you go ahead, Chris.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I don't disagree. I think visually though it made certain sense, because if you look at certain scenes, it's clear when he's walking around like, this guy's the president, right? Because Tim Robbins is 6'5". He towers over everybody, right? So there's certain scenes where he's walking through the building. He's humongous, and Paul Newman's like 5'10". He's not a small man, but he just towers over this guy. So you see him walking through the lobby. They deliberately cast people that are no taller than 6 feet because he just stands so much higher than everybody else, and he's walking around, and like he's in the middle of the frame.
I mean, I get it that they wanted like a mixture of Jimmy Stewart, Gary Cooper, like they wanted that thing, and Tim Robbins is that, whereas like
and he does a good job in the part, like when he does switch from kind of like I'm just an ignoramus to like really sweet and stuff like that, when he's like, I'm just blowing off steam, like I feel like he gives a really good performance. But Ian, I think you might be totally right, because imagine the scene where he has the dream sequence where he's chasing like the dancer around. Like Tim Robbins just seems like a goofy asshole, and it's like, I don't care if this guy like wants to get laid, but like Steve Buscemi, like that would like him, a tiny little Steve Buscemi chasing this gorgeous woman, like wanting to be like, there's some great figure, but like knowing that he's just like a normal down-to-earth guy in the end, I think that would have improved it. I was thinking,
and I gotta say also, like, I don't think that the height thing is as important, because you know who the part was written for and who they wanted?
No.
Did anybody of you read this?
No.
Tom Cruise. They wanted Tom Cruise.
What?
And he was signed on, and he was going to do it until he decided to go with Interview with the Vampire. And so it was set up with Tom Cruise and Clint Eastwood in the, Norval Barnes, Sidney Musburger parts.
Interesting.
I don't know about Clint Eastwood in that part. I also will say, I'm not going to say a fucking word against Paul Newman. He's a fucking treasure of a person. He's not funny. Like, there's no part in this movie where I think he's got the comedic chops to pull off, like...
He's very one note. Maybe Clint Eastwood could have pulled off one note better than Paul Newman. I mean, I think that's fair.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, I was imagining like, oh, you go, Chris.
I was gonna say, is he really supposed to be funny though? Isn't he kind of supposed to be like the old hard, like, I don't know. I guess.
Well, maybe. I mean, if he would have played it like, I think maybe that's the Coen brothers' fault then, because I feel like the tone never, like, he's not matched with whatever tone it is. Like, if this was a 30s or 40s Capra movie, the big hard ass boss would not feel so non-threatening also. Like, I don't know. It's not like... It's like... Totally. He's not threatening, even though he is playing it like completely straight, serious asshole guy, I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking like for the main character, because at first I was kind of like, I don't know about Tim Robbins in this. Imagine if, like, I was like, what could get me more emotionally into the story? And I was thinking... Tom Hanks could have done a great job, and Jim Carrey could have done a great job, but I think they would have in the end felt a little too similar to Tim Robbins. I think your Steve Buscemi is kind of right on. But I really think there is a couple scenes like missing from this movie where you get like I want to see more from Amy Archer's point of view. Like Tim Robbins' character just isn't that interesting to me. Right. And he carries the movie, but then like the Coen brothers seem way more interested rather than following the dynamic between the romantic leads. They seem more interested in just following the hula hoop down the street. You know what I mean? And seeing what kind of funny shapes they can create. And, that is where the kind of I think the energy of the movie is.
We can talk a little bit more. I mean, we have to talk about the circles because, I will be done talking about circles after this movie. I know the Coen brothers aren't done with it, but it's they are just they wear it so on their sleeve that they're this is what we're all about, is this sort of elemental cycle that exists and trying to explore the to the point even that it begins and ends in the same spot, basically with him on the roof and then as it plays into the Deus Ex Machina that happens where I don't even want to take this moment to get into that who is God in this movie, because that's so dated. Let's just put it that way. We can talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about it.
But I do want to talk about it. But I do want to say that if you just take it as anybody playing that part, then I read it kind of because I already had decided that I was not on board with the movie, all the way. Even though I loved parts of it and I laughed my ass off and whatever. But when that happened, what it felt like to me was this is them as directors stepping in and being it's really hard to create. You try to control everything. He even says as soon as he's I'm not really supposed to do this, and I think that the moral of the story, which is maybe the moral of the Coen brothers story is as terms of they make these $7 million movies and it's great, is that if you try to control inspiration, he's chasing inspiration. If you try to control everything, it doesn't end up right. And if you just sit back and enjoy the ride, Norval Barnes ends up learning to do, and enjoy this cycle of circles,
Right. But he was enjoying dating Zaza and getting massages.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He was just enjoying the ride, not trying so hard, trying to control it. I don't think he was anytime that he's trying to take control. I mean, I guess
you're wrong, because he was not in control of the company. The board was in control of the company, and he was just sitting in the top thinking oh, I'm in charge, but really,
yeah, he's the passenger.
He was
That's
not
what I'm
actually
saying.
working.
It's he's a passenger the whole time.
Okay.
And I think them as a movie, he dies, or he would have died when it gets away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And then they stop him and they're no, it doesn't have to be this way. It's a cycle, or it's a circle. We'll just take it back and show that he can just enjoy the ride. He's got a Frisbee coming up next. It's okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
The whole movie, he's the passenger.
Yeah. But I think it's also about the illusion of being in control too. He bought, I mean, they make a big point, he bought into this idea of himself as the great man, which is the movie shows is not a real thing. Good ideas are kind of, and creativity is available to anybody, from him to the elevator guy, to basically anybody, and trying to put that on a pedestal and make that the, act like it's some work of genius just to be creative is kind of wrongheaded. But I did think that it was interesting that when Hudsucker kind of comes back for my second favorite character in the film, when he comes down as an angel, which that is the funniest scene in the movie to me, even though there's some corny jokes that by that point I'm I have no patience for, by the last 5 minutes of the movie. But he says I made these mistakes, I thought of myself as the great man and blah blah blah. But he does have a gleam in his eye, and this sort of where he's the future is still a possibility. You know what I mean? You can see why he was the leader of the company, because he had this kind of visionary kind of like attitude. It was just having a good attitude. It wasn't like he was a creative genius. We don't see anything that he invented, but I like that. I love the Coen brothers' love of a confident person. They love like a big, confident, blowhard kind of guy. But I don't know, they kind of like make a line between that and like an asshole, kind of full of yourself character, like who Norville Barnes becomes, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah.
I saw some of your big guys behind desks in this, Chris.
Okay, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think here's my theory. Like, it's every movie now, right? And it's usually the like lower, main character has to approach this powerful guy behind a desk, and it's like, is this their own, like, have they approached a lot of like execs behind desks and been shut down, and they like the little guy, like they feel like the little guy? Is that them talking to like the big wigs, like pitching their ideas? Because this keeps coming up. Like it's impossible to ignore at this point, I think, right? And I don't want to put too much on it because it is like this thing, it's not necessarily a big deal, but maybe there's something to it. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think they're
absolutely.
I think they're very class conscious. I think they're very power conscious, and I think that just comes out in the movies. That's a part of their films.
But they use it as an aesthetic over and over again. And in this one, like I said, it hit me how it was almost comical how much they were laying into their aesthetic. Like, it was just how they're like, oh, here's our repertoire like popping up in 1 second roles. Here's, whether it's Steve Buscemi or John Polito or whoever, like who else was in there? Oh, well, John Mahoney's got a bigger part, but, they just do that. And then they've got, the guys behind desks, they've got the circles like take such a precedent. They've got, rolling is always a big thing, which is, I know, a part of circles, but like they like to show things roll. I've noticed in a lot of their movies. And then, the dream sequence. And that's why, because I've like staked my claim in this idea that they favor dream sequences like as a way of showing what the movie's about. I don't know. They use it so often in all their movies that the dream sequence that is in this, if you don't even consider like, I don't know, I did think of like so much of the, well, I don't know, segments that are just like what do you call it when something's happening over time? Montages. So many montage segments where it's like fucking, it's almost like a dream sequence too, like the way that like it happens in, a minute and a half where you just see like the hula hoops go from, being made to being the biggest thing in the world. And
from being made to being dismissed to being the biggest thing in the world. Yeah. Exactly. It's quite a ride.
And then, but the actual dream sequence in this is like his dancing, with like inspiration or however you want to look at it. That's how I read it, was like he's just chasing after inspiration. And that's not like his arc of the movie. Like he starts the movie with the circle and issue. Like it's, the movie's not him trying to find the next thing. It's when he like tries to find the next thing that he's like not on top of the world because he's or not, I shouldn't say not on top of the world, but not like in his zone. Like he becomes an asshole. He's not himself. He becomes an asshole. He becomes like, and I think that is like, if you look at the Coen brothers and how they've built themselves to this point, their last movie was also about a director or a writer trying to like be inspired by something that's not inspiring to him. And then like this movie, it's like this guy that like wants to, create the next big thing, but he doesn't have it as part of the movie anyway. And then it ends. It's a huge disappointment. It makes like $3 million off of $25 million budget. It's like, critically not liked. And then they go from that to making another $6 million movie of Fargo, which is just like, changes independent movies forever. To
a degree, they were up against a hell of a lot of amazing time-honored blockbusters that year too. I mean, not in the same, like necessarily the same week, that they came out, I guess. But I mean, 94 had movies like, The Lion King. I mean, Tim Robbins is also in Shawshank Redemption that year. Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, Usual Suspects. Speed was a big hit that year,
I think even more important to me, like in terms of those, is that it came out the same year as Pulp Fiction and Clerks, which, like, up until this point, the Coen brothers were, along with, like Travis brought up, Jim Jarmusch and David Lynch, they were like the indie guys. You had your Zemeckis and Spielberg and these guys making blockbusters. And then, to a lesser degree, because he's kind of in the middle there, the other guys that I wanted to bring up last week that I didn't get around to, that I thought of, there's 3 of them. And all 3 of these guys are a little closer to the Spielberg, Zemeckis than they are to the Lynch, Jarmusch, but they are kind of close to the Coen brothers. And that is Tim Burton, I think, is like in this weird middle ground right there.
Yeah.
Spike Lee, who had gone from doing like really, sort of lyrical in his own like universe world to like making Malcolm X and then, that in this time frame. And then Jonathan Demme, who had been making like Something Wild and all these like weird independent movies that are like quirky, like the Raising Arizona brand.
Independent
who
in
then
spirit.
Goes on to, yeah,
for sure.
And then he goes on to make, in these years of Barton Fink to Miller's Crossing, Silence of the Lambs in Philadelphia. Like they're all sort of stretching in this weird way. And then Fargo, well, not Fargo, but Coen brothers are the other indie darlings of this time. And then all of a sudden onto the scene bursts Pulp Fiction and Clerks, which like redefine independent movies.
Well,
all of a sudden, like Coen brothers don't feel independent when you think about it up against Clerks. You know what I mean?
They don't seem like they don't seem like relatable to like normal cool people. I think that's such an interesting comparison because those movies were so radical because the dialogue felt like so immediate and so like real. And like compared to this movie, like when like Chris, when you're listing the other movies that came out that year, I'm like, I can't imagine this movie being popular any year like outside of the 50s. Like, you know what I mean? Like the movie is so in its own little like world that like who cares? Like who honestly cares other than the Coen brothers? And like, I do like this movie and I love those old movies that it's based on, but it's like it is such a niche thing to get to put $25 million behind. I mean, even the other movies we were talking about, like the Batman movies and the Rocketeer and Dick Tracy, those were early 90s. We're getting towards like the mid 90s now.
Right.
And that aesthetic is just like seems so dated even in that little window, that 90s window. If I could go back to Dick Tracy and what I think that movie does really well that this movie does not.
Yeah, please.
The Coen brothers, like I said, kind of follow the like hula hoop just down the street and they just want to see where it goes. And they want to watch all the pipes like pumping things out and stuff like that. And it does have like a really fun like Tim Burton-y kind of feel. In Dick Tracy, there are a number of musical montages. But those are done in a different style from the score. They are done by a different songwriter and they have lyrics. And so it gives it, it reinforces like the thematic things that are happening, the story things that are happening. And it also kind of, gives you like a connection to like a human emotion because the songs are actually sung by a character in the movie. And it has a human voice and it kind of carries you through the story in a way that feels a lot more generous than this movie, which is just like, I hope you're ready for another montage, like I hope you're ready for this dream sequence. And it's just like, or it becomes like Hudsucker Proxy becomes so stylized that it's like becomes like an abstraction. You know what I mean? And the story is happening in the distant background, and it's like, yeah, this guy's bad now because this happened.
Well, it's almost like the Singing in the Rain, like Broadway melodies, like segment. That whole like, all of a sudden it turns into this dream ballet where it's like going through a whole other thing in the middle of this movie or at the end of the movie. Like the whole the whole of Hudsucker Proxy is that segment.
Right. Well, I was going to say that whole movie is building towards that, This movie is just like...
This one just starts there.
Yeah, exactly. Circling the drain.
Oh, shit.
No, I like this. I do like this movie a lot. I admire it a lot. And obviously the Coen brothers are amazing. But yeah, I just like... I feel like it's so weird to read about how much they wanted like that kind of connection to the audience and to like have a movie that was like connected with people, and then this is what they were doing. Yeah, it's outrageous.
It's funny. This kind of touches on something I've brought up a couple of times. I know we've discussed the overarching theme of it, and that being sort of black representation in Coen Brothers movies, right? And so this one, it's kind of hard to ignore this particular.
Yeah, we can't.
Yeah, so I
gotta get there.
I've mentioned
building there too myself.
I've mentioned the term magical Negro before, and just I know you guys are probably aware of it, but usually, I mean, just to explain, it's basically a trope. I think Spike Lee might have really coined it, but he discussed it at length at least. It's basically a portrayal of a token black character in a movie who basically exists just to help the white main character find their arc and undergoing none of their own. They don't necessarily have to be super magical. I think Spike Lee called it the super duper magical Negro or whatever. But it's funny because speaking of the movies I named that came out that year, like 3 of those movies actually feature magical Negroes.
Was the king.
Shawshank, Lion King. If you think about it, like Rafiki of this movie filmed about Africa. Rafiki's the only person with an actual African accent, and he's a monkey. Like, that's pretty tone deaf right there, right? But
this,
Forrest Gump. I mean, yeah,
Ben Cobbs, is that the actor that's in this?
Yeah, Bill Cobbs.
Bill Cobbs, yeah, and he's like, I didn't put it together, but before you just said that, but like the Rafiki character is like this character. Like it's totally just the director that comes in to be like, oh, but here's the answer. Like the deliverer of the Deus Ex Machina. Later you get the like trope of like literally, the black character playing God. And I mean, this one he's doing that. Obviously,
he sits higher than everyone else. Literally, he's even higher than Musburger's office, technically, right? Because that's part of why they show you the clock in his office.
Yeah,
I
don't want to say anything against like his performance because he does a fine job, but it is like cringeworthy that they made him do that minstrel fucking show of a performance. Like everybody else is doing, Frank Capra like sparky dialogue, and he's just sitting there like, no, I know all things. It's just like, oh God.
It's just unfortunate he's the only black character. It's it can work when like there's a couple different people in the film, but literally in a New York City, he's the only black face in the whole film, just sort of like the other ones I'd mentioned. It's one thing when there's a broad swath of representation and one happens to be someone who helps the main character find themselves or whatever. But
it's crazy that like up until this point, I mean, we talked about it for a second last week, and I had mentioned that like it was gonna have to get talked about this week because they're so bad about it up until this point, or including this point. The only time I was thinking about it this week is Blood Simple, their first movie, where like of the 5 characters, one of them is a black guy, which is all that they need to do. Is like they don't have to have it be like necessarily like a major part of the plot or anything like that, but like just if there's a random face around, like let it be representative.
Yeah,
like it's
yeah, it's I always kind of like go both ways when it comes to like representation in movies, because like, well, I don't know. There is a responsibility. You get $25 million to make a movie. You know what I mean? And like, yeah, you have a responsibility to do something with that, and not just make a mythical white New York City. That's like a crime.
Exactly.
It's not right.
And on the other end of that token too, you don't want to necessarily have white writers like.
Well, you don't want that black character that they created.
What they sound like.
Yeah, you absolutely. I mean? That's what I'm saying. Like they did it, and they did a horrible job. Yeah. And so it's like, wait, maybe there shouldn't be representation. And that's but then when you get, and then that like leads us to like when Sofia Coppola remade that Civil War movie, and she's like, I could not speak to the black characters in that story, so I removed all black characters from this Civil War story, and it's like that's just as bad.
Don't make the movie.
There's no
it's
just don't do it.
So it's like you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, until you have a you know, in America that like has an industry where there's actual representation like at all levels. So, well, I mean, you know, like that should be, I mean, to me, rather than like faulting individual creators, except right now we can definitely fault them for this character, but the problem really is a bigger picture one, and it's
well, I mean, honestly, like even if they had just had like some black people like buying their hula hoops and doing like, you know, like in the crowd scenes when they're searching for jobs, like all of those scenes that have like, you know, big scale crowds of people.
Well, I don't think black people are really known for like taking toys like, you know, jump ropes or roller skates and like doing cool stuff with it. So that, I don't know if that would really fit in this movie, but like maybe, I don't see it. Couldn't, impossible. No, so anyway, that's a crime.
So yeah, that was, you know, that's not the last time we're going to talk about it, because it is like a sad reality of all of their movies.
We should have a segment like Racism Watch. You did it again.
You blew it.
We should like play like a sound clip of that guy's voice from this movie. Like that's another story. I
almost started to do it. I'm like, I'm not going to do it.
Thank you. Yeah, but I do want to say one thing about two things about the weird kind of God and the devil, I guess, characters, which is that like, you know, I watched this movie with my wife, and she actually like loved a lot of it, but she was annoyed like me by the end of it, and she was just like, it made no sense to her why was Aloysius, is that his name? Like, how he was evil. Like there's one line where he's like, oh yeah, Aloysius is the one who told me that Amy or whatever was secretly a reporter, but like there's not even one scene where he like looks at the camera and like gives a smile like he knows what's going on, or says something like, oh, we'll see about that.
I think the only thing that you have is that, like, you know, like you said, Chris, like Moses is up at the highest part of the clock tower, and Aloysius is like working like down on
his knees. Yeah, exactly. You know, and that's it. And he just kind of looks like kind of scary. He kind of looks scary. Yeah. So is that what we're supposed to, you know?
But they show, you know, the Coen brothers zoom in on so many weird ugly faces that one random guy scraping the names off doors doesn't click with you, like, oh wait, what's that guy up to? Because like
could have seen Beatnik Steve Buscemi and thought the same thing.
Exactly.
I had to actually look it up, but I mean, the name Aloysius means the great final battle, basically.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, but who the hell's gonna know that, and what does that mean for the movie? You know, outside of like, you know, the film nerds or what have you. So I have
agree. To make I just have to make a really quick interjection, which is just that I saw a tweet last night, and I was literally like, this person must have just watched the Hudsucker Proxy. It has nothing to do with the Hudsucker Proxy, but let me read you this tweet. It's, of course, nobody has a job now. In the 60s, an entire job was press buttons in an elevator and paint someone's name on a door.
Totally.
Yes. There was a job for every dumb thing. And it's like, yeah, it's a really good point. But back to the movie, back to the text. I just want to say that like the thing of, well, two things. I'm so sorry. Having like a kind of magical realism in your kind of madcap comedy was a like trope of like the 1940s and movies like Here Comes Mr. Jordan and like It's a Wonderful Life. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that was like a really nice touch in theory, you know, having that kind of happening. And it was also cool just because the Coen brothers, like fate and like the hand of God are such like so present in all their movies and such like a big role of just ruining people's lives and like people not being in control of their lives, that it made sense to see them personified in this kind of like fantasy film. So like I thought it worked in some ways, and I thought it was like a cool thing. And I was like, I was thinking like it would have been really funny if there were like racial caricatures working at the hotel where Barton Fink was staying, like representing like self-loathing and ennui, and they had a battle at the end in like a sombrero and like a, I don't know. I thought that would have been interesting, but anyway, yeah. So I thought it was interesting for those reasons, both as a kind of like a modern version of like an old comedy, and also as a specifically as a Coen brothers thing to kind of like personify those themes.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about this movie, if we look at the other Coen brothers films, it almost always, there's a crime involved, right? And up to this point, they'd all been kind of like your blue collar crime. So like Blood Simple, it's a murder, right? Raising Arizona, there's like a kidnapping and robbery. There's Miller's Crossing, you got racketeering and murder. You've got Barton Fink with, later on there's a murder eventually. But this one, it's like one of the first ones, and correct me if I'm wrong, but really it centers around like a white collar sort of crime world.
Mm-hmm.
There's no like overt murdering happening, no like low level. I don't know. That's something that kind of stood out to me about this movie. Like it's the first criticism of a white collar crime that basically is invisible to almost everyone but the people at the top.
Well, that's a good point, because the main character is not going through any turmoil. He's just like kind of along for the ride.
Put in there, exactly.
He's rolling down the street, which is, I think, why it would have been more interesting for Jennifer Jason Leigh to be the main character, because she is living a lie. Like, even though she's and then she's at least interested in whether or not there's like other kind of goings on at the upper levels.
And how she does shift from she does shift like in her arc from wanting to expose Norville Barnes to wanting to expose Sidney Musburger.
Exactly.
So that would have been a much better movie also. I think we're fixing this movie.
I think it's like the Coen brothers are here. We're like right above them. Just right in terms of like brain power and aesthetic.
Let's bring her back.
I want to throw out a couple more things before we start to rate and give any other final thoughts that like I did love in this movie, because I don't want to just leave it on like that I didn't like it, because there were moments that I loved. Specifically, I already mentioned how great I thought Jennifer Jason Leigh was. I also thought that Carter Burwell's score was the best it's been since like Raising Arizona. I think like the score works so well in this movie. Every time it does like dramatic build up. I know he didn't write, these are all classical songs that he's using, but like anytime it uses like those big dramatic build-ups, whether it's in the romance scenes or showing the scale of New York or whatever it is, it works like to a great degree.
Beautiful.
And then the other thing I wanted to say was Peter Gallagher. Fucking hey, man. Peter Gallagher's great.
Absolutely.
He's got one scene as like Dean Martin singing in this party scene, and I'm like, that guy's good. Like I like him. And I don't know. I just loved little moments like that they do throw in. Also the little I think it's Paul Newman's wife, or Sidney Musburger's wife, and whoever the other girl is that are sitting there that have that 30s voice down so good.
One of the best scenes in the movie. Yeah, so good.
That is so good.
And then you find out at the very end that like she is maybe what drove Hudsucker to suicide.
Exactly.
And he's like, and he starts crying in the middle of his thing, even though he stops crying immediately, and you think that it might just be like a story he's telling himself. I think too, like that whole arc, that like unseen arc.
I mentioned that I laughed like a lot during this movie. Most of it was me thinking about that part at any given part during the movie and laughing.
Just remembering.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Those two girls.
This movie had a lot of great like visual humor, but also like some kind of corny humor that I did not like. I feel like they were really like kind of indulging themselves on, you know what I mean? Like in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I do too. And I think whenever I think that's part of what I threw the blame at Tim Robbins for, was like when he does arch like slapstick stuff, it just didn't work for me.
Oh god, but he did the Muncie song.
Yeah,
unfunny.
It's just not funny.
Yeah,
there was a lot of moments like that where it's like, I don't know.
That's where I thought Jim Carrey could have been great, but like but
it feels like they just let him ad lib that part.
It's It's like that was the year after Jim Carrey broke the world, though. I feel like I don't even know.
Well, The Mask came out that year later as well, so The Mask really blew him up. Yeah, Mask came out in '94.
I thought The Mask, Ace Ventura, and Dumb and Dumber all came out in '93. I thought, like in January, summer, and December.
I was reading that Dumb and Dumber came out the year before, but you're right. Both Ace Ventura came out in like early '94, and then The Mask came out in the summer as like the summer blockbuster. But I could have that off a little bit. But either way, it's right around.
But either way, it's right in that.
He should also be in this, but also I just watched Earth Girls Are Easy for the first time.
Yes, for the first time.
Yeah.
What? You had not seen Earth Girls Are Easy?
Great production design.
What?
All the musical numbers were fantastic, but all the stuff with the aliens was kind of lame. I thought it was like half a great movie, half like kind of dumb. Anyway,
Yeah.
That's for another podcast.
We'll do it on our Goldblum cast.
Yes.
Damon Wayans.
Gina Davis cast.
Yeah. That I would do.
At least he wasn't covered in black hair or something like that. That would have been like,
yeah, there you go.
Come
there
on,
you go.
guys.
Could've been worse.
Thank you, early 90s. All right.
Do we want to rate our movies?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's rate them. Wait, I'll go last.
Okay, I'll go first.
I wasn't prepared for some reason.
I'm going to surprise you and really just give Travis a massive hard on right now because I'm going to put Raising Arizona at number 1. I'm changing my order. And I'm not, I mean, I don't want to, like, I think maybe it's because of Hudsucker Proxy that I, like, appreciate how funny that movie is. I think the reason why I had Miller's Crossing pegged above it before is because, you know, as I'm like watching these, trying to sort of put the pieces together of like what they're trying to say, Raising Arizona feels apart from the other movies in a lot of ways to me. Like it feels like but you know, who the fuck am I kidding? Like I said, you're like up until a few years ago, it probably would stay number 1 with me forever. Anyway, so Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing. I mean, it's Barton Fink and then Hudsucker Proxy.
Damn.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, I skipped Blood Simple. Sorry, third. So Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing, Blood Simple, Barton Fink, Hudsucker Proxy.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm very different, and mine still number 1 spot goes to Blood Simple. I think it's the best like movie that they've made so far at this point. Then Raising Arizona just continues to endear itself to me. So that's number 2, and it actually was augmented by me watching this Hudsucker Proxy film, and I appreciate it even more now that we see that their voice is coming out. Like you see where they were going with that. So again, Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, Hudsucker Proxy, then Miller's Crossing, and I think less and less about this movie as time goes on, it seems. You know, I don't know. And then Barton Fink holding it down last. Maybe that has to do with the fact that I hadn't seen either of those two in the bottom. That could change as we go on, but that's where I stand.
That's cool. Yeah. I think for me, it's pretty simple. It's like Raising Arizona, easily the top. Like just, again, maybe the best comedy of the 90s, along with Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Meaning
80s,
it's like, I'm sorry, of the 80s, which means maybe it's one of the best movies of all time.
Well, you know, I mean, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but Pee-wee's Big Adventure is my pick for best comedy ever made.
That is completely correct. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah.
It's so good.
It's so good. Pee Wee Herman giving a like Charlie Chaplin level performance
in a debut, no less.
In a beautiful stylized world. Yeah, it's incredible.
And that's partially
right?
why I put like Tim Burton in that lexicon with the Coen brothers, because they both sort of came out of this weird. Yeah. But like I said, there's a. You just talked about the two schools with, you know, the Spielberg school of this time and Cameron and all those guys, and then like these other guys. Yeah, some of them ride that line kind of close.
Absolutely, you're totally right. And speaking in an interesting point about Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Tim Burton's first film was almost another script that was floating around in Hollywood at the time. It was After Hours, which Martin Scorsese
Martin Scorsese?
Yeah, Martin Scorsese went on to direct it and did an incredible job with it. Like in a way, it feels to me very much like a Coen Brothers movie, like a pre-Coen Brothers movie. He like does these crazy stylistic flourishes like for almost no reason throughout the film, and it's just like an amazing, wonderful movie to behold, and it's a really great comedy too. Anyway, back to my list. Raising Arizona, number 1. And then in a distant second, another like it's totally solid movie, Blood Simple. And I do think it's like a really great movie. I'm going to go with, for number 3, a tie between all 3 of these movies. Hudsucker Proxy, Barton Fink, Miller's Crossing. They're all incredible, and they all leave me with the same feeling, which is just like exhaustion. You know what I mean? Like they're really cool. There. Yeah, I think any one of these movies, if you made like a montage of the best moments and like played it at the Oscars, you'd be like, that looks like the coolest thing I've ever seen. You know what I mean?
I agree. I mean, you know, more so than Raising Arizona. That's
exactly.
For sure. Like if you just put like one of the segments from this movie up against any segment in Raising Arizona, except for maybe the, you know, fucking great diaper robbery scene, but I don't know. I don't know.
No,
there's a lot to love in this one too.
Yes.
It's still bottom of the list for me.
Yeah. I do love the opening of this movie. I just wanted to say that one more time. Like, even though Bill, whatever his name is, like Cobbs, didn't do the best like, it wasn't the best character of the film. That opening narration, I think he delivers so well, and it does feel like an old movie. It feels almost like he's like reciting like Christmas Carol lyrics that were written at that time, and it's such it gets you in that mood.
I didn't even mention like the opening line, which comes back several times, is, you know, because this also has that motif that they do. I don't even know what we're going to call it, where they repeat lines a lot.
Right.
And they do a lot of, you know, but you know, it starts with, how did he get so high and why is he feeling so low? And it's like, that's a great moment. Like, there's no, I don't know. It's the whole circular fucking thing that they're exploring.
And that's actually what kind
up until this point.
No, totally. That's actually what sucked me in when I was a kid, was hearing a black voice at the beginning of a movie. Something that I really liked, especially, you know, back then, and I still do to this day. I really love seeing like black faces and black voices, but I kind of like, oh, this could be interesting. Then you like almost never see him again until, you know, toward the end of the movie, and then you realize, okay, this is what
but did you see something? But you do see some of the whitest people of all time. Like, just at an era, like,
Eyebrows guy is great. We got to wrap up, but I just also want to throw a bone to Eyebrows guy. That guy's fucking funny.
All right, guys.
I'm crying, dude. All right, Fargo's next week.
Yes.
And I can't wait. I mean,
so pumped.
You know, spoiler alert. You guys got a number one on your hands coming up, I think. I love this movie. It's so good.
All right, guys. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next week.